You think you know how history is made? No, you are mistaken. Here, on the desolate shore of Marathon, reeking of sweat, fear, and despair, the fate of Europe is decided not by heroism or brilliant strategy. Here, everything is determined by exhaustion, boredom, forgotten names, numb legs, and bad bread. Victory is not loud shouts and glorious feats, but the silent arithmetic of corpses, endless arguments over who should have sacrificed more to the gods, and a homesickness stronger than any enemy. History will invent legends of a great victory, but the truth is in the mud, the fear, and the uncomfortable questions nobody wants to answer. You are here. You are watching the Battle of Marathon, and you already know no textbook will ever tell how it really was. But before you get comfortable, leave a like under this video and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which city you are watching from and what time it is for you. I am really interested to see who has joined us. Now, make yourself comfortable. We are beginning. You stand at the edge of Marathon Bay, not that you ever dreamed of such a thing, and certainly not in any particularly heroic capacity. In the early morning, the salty breeze drifts over the sand, carrying a dense cocktail of seaweed, wet wool, and, most potently, human anxiety. All around you, hoplites, burly men from Athens, some alarmingly young, others suspiciously old, are fidgeting with their gear, casting nervous glances at the sea. You too cannot help but peer at the horizon, where Persian ships sit in a silent wooden row. You try not to count them because you already know the number is terrifyingly large. You would like to believe you are here for glory. History books, which have not been written yet, but will be much to your posthumous irritation, will talk about heroes standing strong against overwhelming odds. In reality, you are standing ankle deep in gritty sand, wrestling with an ill-fitting helmet and wondering if there is a polite way to excuse yourself from the greatest moment in Greek history without looking like a complete coward. The army around you is restless. Hoplites tap their shields, adjusting leather straps that never seem to sit right. The morning is heavy with that unmistakable tension that comes before the storm. The will we live or will we die kind of tension that makes you question your breakfast choices. You remember, with ironic clarity, that you did not actually eat breakfast. Perhaps you should have, but then perhaps you should not have answered the call to arms either. Choices, choices. In the distance, Athenians form up into ranks. The lines look more impressive from far away, where you cannot see the exhaustion and doubt on the faces of the men. Your shield feels too heavy, your spear unwieldy, and your sandals are already chafing. You realize with grim amusement that the stories of Greek valor seldom mention blisters. Your mind wanders, as it often does when fear is thick in the air. You remember being told that this battle will decide everything, not only your life, but the future of Athens, of Greece, of democracy itself. You try to care truly, but it is difficult to contemplate the fate of civilization when you are more immediately concerned about the fate of your toes. They are cold and damp, and the sand is everywhere. You look to your left and right, recognizing neighbors and strangers. Some faces are twisted in determination, others in terror. It strikes you that history will only remember the victors and the dead, and you are not convinced you want to be either. The older men murmur prayers under their breath, invoking gods who, you suspect, are having a leisurely breakfast atop Mount Olympus and are entirely unconcerned with your predicament. Time crawls. The minutes feel like hours. Occasionally, someone attempts a joke, usually about the Persians' strange hats or the Athenians' notoriously bland rations, but the laughter dies quickly. Humor is in short supply. The only thing in abundance is sweat, sweat and anticipation. Across the bay, Persian banners flap listlessly. Their army is a tapestry of colors and accents, drawn from lands you have only heard of in stories. There are, you are told, more Persians than the grains of sand under your feet. This is probably an exaggeration, but you do not bother to count, because the only number that matters to you is one, your own skin. The general's pace. Orders are whispered, shouted, repeated. The formation shifts again. It is as if everyone hopes that by rearranging themselves, they might also rearrange their fate. You suspect fate is more stubborn than that. You think about leaving. You really do. You imagine simply walking away, perhaps wading out into the sea, becoming just another fisherman, forever lost in the waves. But you do not move. Nobody does. There is an unspoken agreement that cowardice, while practical, is deeply unfashionable in this context. The sun rises, bright and indifferent. Shadows stretch across the sand. Somewhere, a flock of gulls takes flight, squawking their own commentary on the day's significance. You realize, with a pang of envy, that the birds do not care who wins this battle. They are only interested in the scraps left behind. You sigh. You roll your shoulders. You try to remember the last time you truly believed in glory, or at least in a good night's sleep. The moments slip by, slow and heavy, and you begin to understand that history is never quite as thrilling as the storytellers make it sound. It is, more often than not, a waiting game, a long, tedious stretch of nerves and doubts, punctuated by a handful of frantic minutes that decide everything. You are not ready. You will never be ready. But here you are, at the edge of Marathon Bay, staring into the foggy distance and waiting for the world to change. You have never seen so many ships in one place. It is not a poetic exaggeration, though you suspect the bards will make it sound grander in future tales. The Persian fleet, anchored just beyond the reach of your javelin, sits in silent testimony to the art of over preparation. Each ship is packed to the point of absurdity, with men, horses, and endless crates filled with things you can only guess at: textiles, tools, perhaps spices, or more likely the notorious Persian hardtack, which rumor has it is only slightly softer. than the marble statues dotting Athens. From your vantage point, the disembarkation looks more like an endless, bureaucratic nightmare than a harbinger of doom. You watch as longboats shuttle back and forth between the main fleet and the shoreline, unloading row upon row of soldiers. They step onto Greek soil not with the confidence of conquerors, but with the stoic resignation of men who have endured days at sea and are now expected to march, fight, and perhaps die far from home. It is said that the Persians number in the tens of thousands. Some whispers even claim there are 100,000 of them. You are skeptical. After all, who has time to count such a horde? It is easier, and frankly more fun, to just say countless, which sounds impressive and spares you the arithmetic. Still, the sight is intimidating. The Persian line seems to grow every minute, like some living organism fed by the steady trickle of men and animals spilling from the boats. You catch sight of the cavalry. Horses, nervous and stamping, are led awkwardly across the unfamiliar sand. The Persians pride themselves on their cavalry, but the terrain is not in their favor. Sand sucks at hooves, and you almost feel sorry for the riders as they curse under their breath, trying to keep their proud beasts calm amid the chaos. Almost, not quite. There are banners everywhere. They flutter in the morning breeze, painted with strange symbols and gods you cannot name. Some are gold, others deep blue, many trimmed in patterns that dazzle the eyes. The banners are so numerous that they seem to mock the simplicity of your own Athenian standard, a plain, proud reminder that while you may not have the resources for fancy embroidery, you do have plenty of opinions about democracy. Along the beach, Persian officers bark orders in a language you do not understand, but the meaning is clear. Organize, count, line up, do not dawdle. You wonder how many translators are required to keep this army moving in anything resembling the same direction. Judging by the chaos on the beach, the answer is not enough. There are also camp followers, cooks, servants, merchants, hoping to make a quick profit from the needs of soldiers. You see a donkey stubbornly refusing to move, no matter how its owner pleads. In this moment, you recognize a kindred spirit. The donkey is outnumbered, out of place, and entirely unimpressed by all the pomp. As the Persians assemble, you realize just how methodical their preparations are. Soldiers fall into ranks with mechanical precision, their uniforms immaculate, their weapons polished to a dull, terrifying gleam. Everything about them radiates the kind of discipline that only comes from a lifetime of drill and a healthy fear of Persian overlords. This is not a rabble. This is an army designed for conquest by a civilization obsessed with order. And yet, in the gaps between regiments, you catch glimpses of weariness. There are men rubbing their eyes, others clutching at lucky charms, a few sharing quiet words that by their tone are probably not prayers. You suspect that, whatever their numbers, the Persians are as human as you, exhausted, anxious, perhaps wondering if they will live to see another sunrise. But numbers do matter. When you see the Persian line stretching and stretching along the beach, your confidence shrivels. Overhead, the sun climbs higher. The Persians begin assembling siege engines, rows of archers, and their fearsome immortals, the elite guard, so called because by official doctrine they are never allowed to fall below a precise number. You are told there are always 10,000 immortals. It is a bureaucratic nightmare and a public relations triumph, you suppose. Meanwhile, on your own side, your generals look pale. They peer across the distance with narrowed eyes, calculating the odds, muttering quietly about flanks, reserves, and, most importantly, whether the Spartans will arrive in time to share in the misery. You wish for Spartans, you do, if only because their famous courage would provide excellent cover for your own desire to run away. Back on the Persian side, the tents are going up. Giant striped pavilions bloom along the beach, some as tall as small houses. You wonder if the Persian king, Darius, ever imagined how many tent poles would be required to subjugate the Greeks. He must have sent an entire forest across the Aegean. The sight of so many tents makes you drowsy, or maybe that is just nerves. The whole process is so elaborate, so slow, that you almost forget there is a battle coming. It is easy in these interminable hours to imagine that war is simply a matter of logistics, that the greatest threat you face is boredom. But every now and then, a horn blows, a voice calls out, and the reality of it all comes crashing back. The Persians are here to conquer, and you are here to stop them. One of you will fail, but not yet. For now, there is only the sound of hammers, the shuffle of feet, and the distant cries of animals unimpressed by human ambitions. The sun climbs higher, the shadows shrink, and still the Persians come ashore, one after another, until the beach groans beneath their numbers. You stand on the edge of the world, waiting for history to begin, and it is, against all odds, astonishingly, almost painfully dull. It turns out that standing on the brink of a world defining battle is not the best time to get philosophical, and yet that is precisely what everyone around you seems to be doing. The beach and hills around Marathon are filled not only with armored men, but also with a haphazard collection of citizens, farmers, priests, and wandering philosophers, all united by a single emotion: confusion. You look around and notice a small group of Athenians gathered under a makeshift canopy. They are arguing, as is their tradition, about which god should receive the most fervent sacrifice this morning. Should they pour wine for Athena, whose wisdom they claim brought them here? Should they burn offerings for Ares in the hope that he is less bored today than usual? Or perhaps Zeus, who, in theory, has the final say in all things, though anyone who has read the local weather patterns might question the effectiveness of Zeus's attention to detail. Nearby, a priest sweats profusely as he stands over a trembling goat, holding a knife with more apprehension than skill. Around him, a growing crowd murmurs with morbid curiosity, watching for omens in every twitch of the animal's tail. The priest, it seems, is determined to find a sign, any sign, that today will end well. You have never been convinced that the gods pay much attention to goat entrails, but at times like this, you start to hope you are wrong. On a rocky outcrop above the beach, another group has set up a series of crude statues. Athena, Apollo, Artemis, and even the obscure and faintly ridiculous Pan, who is said to haunt these very hills. Each god, represented by hastily carved wood or chipped stone, is draped with whatever garlands could be found that morning. The air is thick with smoke from burning herbs, and the chanting, intended to inspire courage, mostly makes you sleepy. You close your eyes and listen for a divine response. Unsurprisingly, the only answer is the distant roar of the sea and the persistent squabble of seabirds. A few soldiers, more practical than pious, have decided to hedge their bets. You see a man slip a small offering to every god he can remember, just in case. I do not care who helps, he mutters, as long as someone does. You find this approach refreshingly honest. Somewhere in the background, the philosophers have gathered. Of course they have, and they are not wasting the opportunity for debate. Two elderly men argue furiously about fate, claiming with passionate certainty that either the gods control every arrow or that destiny is just the result of bad planning. A younger philosopher, who has not yet learned to hide his cynicism, observes that victory is decided less by divine will and more by whoever had a proper breakfast. You decide, once again, that you should have eaten. Among the citizen soldiers, anxiety is a kind of communal ritual. Some men cross themselves in every conceivable way. Others refuse to look at the sky for fear of seeing an unlucky cloud. A rumor spreads that an owl, a sign of Athena, was seen flying over the camp at dawn. Within minutes, the story has grown. Now there were two owls, and one of them spoke in riddles. The power of superstition is matched only by the inventiveness of bored soldiers. Meanwhile, the priests continue their rituals, droning out prayers in practiced monotony. You cannot help but notice how similar these chants are to the ones you hear at funerals. A sobering thought. Still, the process continues, as it must. Blood is spilled, incense burned, and everyone waits for a sign, preferably a positive one. If nothing else, the activity keeps people busy, distracting them from the mass of Persians gathering just over the next rise. You begin to wonder what the Persians are doing about their own gods. Are they making sacrifices on the shore? Are their priests more effective or merely better dressed? You try to remember the names of any Persian deities, but come up blank. You suspect that somewhere across the sand, their soldiers are just as nervous, just as eager for a sign that their own gods have not taken the day off. Amidst all this, a few of the older farmers, locals who know every hill and gully, shuffle by with baskets of bread, olives, and questionable wine. They offer quiet words of encouragement, which mostly sound like "try not to die," and "if you see my cousin, tell him to bring back my mule." Their faith, such as it is less in the gods and more in the stubbornness of their neighbors. You find yourself drawn to the outskirts of the gathering, where the hills roll away from the coast. There, you catch a glimpse of an old woman scattering barley on the ground. She mutters an invocation to Demeter, goddess of grain, asking her to keep the fields safe from trampling feet and, incidentally, from being burned during the chaos to come. Her priorities are refreshingly practical. Soldiers come and go, she says, not bothering to look at you, but barley is what feeds the city. As the sun rises higher, the rituals wind down. The priests solemnly pronounce that the omens are good, because really, what else are they going to say? The soldiers nod, reassured, or at least content to pretend they are reassured. For all the talk of fate and the will of the gods, it occurs to you that most people here are simply hoping to survive another day. Faith, you realize, is not always a matter of belief. Sometimes it is just the only thing left when every other comfort is stripped away. You take one last look at the motley collection of gods and mortals, each caught up in their own rituals. The goat, having survived its ordeal, is quietly led away, much to the disappointment of those hoping for a more dramatic sign. The philosophers drift back to their arguments, the priests to their prayers, and the rest of the camp returns to the more urgent business of checking armor and muttering to themselves. You are left with the distinct impression that the gods, if they are watching at all, are doing so for their own amusement. And as you trudge back toward your place in the ranks, you cannot shake the suspicion that, in the end, the only certainty is that nobody really knows what tomorrow will bring. If history teaches anything, it is this: every great battle is first a great argument about supplies. You might imagine that the eve of Marathon would be alive with tales of bravery, inspirational speeches, or the sharpening of swords. Instead, the most pressing matter among the Athenian camp is bread. More precisely, the insufficient and regrettably stale bread that has arrived by cart, mule, and sheer stubbornness from Athens, a journey that appears to have made the bread angry, or at least resentful of being eaten. You watch as the quartermasters, those unsung anti-heroes of every campaign, shuffle their way through an endless inventory. Their robes are dustier than any armor, their eyes red-rimmed from nights spent counting, recounting, and shouting at anyone who dares suggest that actually there are fewer amphorae of olive oil than the tally says. You learn quickly that to draw the ire of a quartermaster is to risk going without dinner, or worse, being assigned to dig new latrines. The daily ritual of rations is conducted with the solemnity of a religious ceremony, only with more cursing. In one corner of the camp, a heated discussion rages over whether the week-old cheese is safe to eat. One old soldier claims to have eaten worse at sea. A younger one is not convinced and keeps poking the cheese with his spear as if it might leap up and bite him. The debate ends as most such debates do. Nobody is satisfied. Everyone is slightly hungrier, and the cheese is left to consider its next move. Wine, that great balm of the Athenian soul, is in similarly short supply. You are treated to a lecture by a local vintner turned logistics assistant on the virtues of watered wine, which he assures you is good for both hydration and morale. The soldiers are less sure. A few sip the watery concoction, pulling faces as though drinking a bitter medicine. Someone jokes that if the Persians do not kill them, dysentery certainly will. There is, naturally, the matter of water itself. The wells near Marathon are not deep, and the army's presence has taxed them to their limit. Buckets are hauled from sunup to sundown, with the unlucky tasked with keeping the water pure, and the luckier ones pretending not to notice the floating debris. You reflect on the irony that for all the grand speeches about freedom and the glory of the polis, most of your day involves queuing for water. Horses, too, are a problem. The Athenians have brought a small handful, most reserved for messengers or the well to do. The creatures are restless, unsatisfied with the meager feed, and prone to chewing anything not nailed down. Their handlers grumble, knowing the animals will never match the Persian cavalry, but also knowing they will be blamed anyway if things go poorly. Even the very basics of the soldier's kit become points of contention. Who has the longest spear? Whose shield is too heavy? Is it better to wear one's helmet now and risk a sweaty brow, or wait until the arrows start to fly? There are no good answers, only the slow drip of complaints that become the soundtrack of life before a battle. Somewhere, a particularly unlucky band of men is assigned the task of digging a new trench for waste. They do so with a kind of existential resignation, debating not tactics, but the merits of different soils for digging. This is the real war, one mutters, pausing to wipe sweat from his brow, and nobody will sing songs about it. As the day drags on, the logistics officers convene a grand council, not, you suspect, to plan victory, but to argue about exactly how many loaves of bread have gone missing and whether it is worth sending someone back to Athens to fetch more. You wonder if anyone will mention that the real problem is not the bread, but the sense that everything here is teetering on the edge of chaos, held together by wishful thinking and increasingly desperate improvisation. There is also the matter of the firewood, which seems to disappear faster than anyone can account for. Each evening, a silent contest takes place as soldiers sneak away to gather twigs and branches, returning triumphantly with their prizes, until, inevitably, a shout rings out because someone has accidentally set fire to an officer's tent. Throughout all this, the Athenian generals pace and mutter. They seem less concerned about the Persian horde than about the ever-growing list of what is missing. We shall stand firm, one proclaims, his voice echoing over the din. We shall make do with what we have. It is stirring, you admit, until you see him scold a servant for misplacing his extra tunic. Night falls, and the logistics of sleep itself become the final ordeal. Some men have tents, others only cloaks. The ground is hard, the insects plentiful, and privacy non existent. arguments about who gets the least lumpy patch of earth threaten to flare into actual combat. Lying awake, you realize that the glories of Marathon are likely to be measured not in heroes or victories, but in the sheer grinding tedium of getting thousands of people fed, watered, and vaguely comfortable. For all the poets will write of valor and strategy, you suspect that the true measure of this battle will be how many soldiers manage to avoid food poisoning before the fighting even starts. And so, lulled by the gentle chorus of snoring men, restless animals, and distant shouting about missing wine jugs, you drift toward uneasy sleep, only faintly comforted by the knowledge that if you survive tomorrow, it will be because someone remembered to bring enough bread. As dawn gives way to another blindingly ordinary day at Marathon, you notice a new figure lingering just beyond the organized chaos of the Athenian camp. He is neither soldier nor officer. No, his armor is entirely metaphorical, constructed from wax tablets, half used parchment, and the sharpest of styluses. You do not know his name yet, but he will one day be known everywhere. Herodotus, professional chronicler, amateur eavesdropper, and, in your private estimation, a world class nuisance. You watch him as he prowls the margins of the encampment, clutching his notes and cocking his head like an owl as he tries to overhear anything remotely quotable. Where others see history as a blur of blood and dust, Herodotus sees a never ending parade of numbers, prices, and trivial remarks. If he were a soldier, he would be the sort who polishes his helmet until it shines, then forgets it on the water cart. His presence has not gone unnoticed. Some of the older officers eye him warily, remembering that a sharp word or a minor complaint uttered in front of the wrong listener might end up being immortalized in a scroll. Others, particularly the junior men, try to impress him, embellishing their stories, puffing up their chests, and dropping dramatic sighs at just the right moments. You find it all rather embarrassing. You soon learn that Herodotus is particularly interested in numbers. He is obsessed with counting things. How many men are in each regiment? How many shields are dented? How many amphorae of wine have gone mysteriously missing overnight? He cornered a harried quartermaster for nearly an hour, scribbling furiously as the poor man tried to explain the simple fact that nobody actually knows the answer to any of these questions. But Herodotus is undeterred. He asks about the length of the Persian fleet, the width of the beach, the precise number of goats sacrificed that morning, and the diameter of the moon last night. He collects the data, compares the stories, and then, in the finest tradition of all chroniclers, picks whichever answer seems the most interesting, regardless of accuracy. At one point, you see him interviewing a farmer who claims to have counted every Persian as they disembarked. According to the farmer, there are not less than 100,000, but not more than 200,000. Herodotus scribbles this down without batting an eye, only pausing to note the man's footwear, as if sandals can shed light on the reliability of military estimates. He listens to the gossips too. A young woman from a nearby village tells him that the Persians have chariots pulled by fire breathing horses. Herodotus, to his credit, blinks only once before carefully inscribing this on his scroll. It is, after all, what she said, and accuracy is a flexible thing when you are building the history of the world. Of course, he is not immune to the draw of food logistics. You overhear him discussing the daily bread distribution, recording which units received moldy loaves and which units had to make do with nothing but onions and regret. He even sketches out a rough map of the camp's latrines for the record. You try not to think about how future generations may someday learn exactly how many pits were dug and how poorly they were sited. It becomes clear to you that Herodotus is less a man than a sponge, soaking up every argument, every idle threat, every half baked rumor that crosses his path. No detail is too trivial. At one point, he carefully measures the width of a discarded sandal strap, muttering something about cultural context. As the day progresses, word spreads that Herodotus has written something mildly insulting about the bread rations in the Theban regiment. The Thebans, already irritable from lack of cheese, gather to demand a correction. Herodotus, unfazed, simply makes a note about strong local feeling regarding rations. He is a master of understatement and perhaps self preservation. You find him in the late afternoon, perched on a rock, writing with a look of supreme contentment. You ask him what exactly he plans to do with all these stories, figures, and contradictory claims. He glances at you, shrugs, and says, "History is just what people remember, or what they think they remember, or what I write down. It is all the same in the end." You are not sure whether to be reassured or alarmed. The truth, you realize, is slippery. Today's grumbling about cheese will become tomorrow's legendary feast. The nervous whispers of men awaiting battle will someday be recounted as epic speeches. Herodotus, in his own way, is more dangerous than a dozen Persian archers. At least an arrow hits only one man at a time. A story, written just so, can turn the whole world upside down. As night falls, you notice Herodotus still writing, hunched over his scrolls by lamplight. The camp is settling into uneasy quiet, but he is still there, chronicling the number of snorers, the oddity of the local frogs, and the precise moment when the moon slips behind the clouds. You wonder, not for the first time, whether you will appear in his history, and if so, whether he will get your name right. You hope, at the very least, he will leave out the bit about you losing your sandals in the mud. But you doubt it. As evening slides in over the camp at Marathon, the arguments shift from bread, cheese, and the endlessly missing amphorae to something much more existential: credit. Now that the real fighting feels closer than ever, the Athenians, never ones to let modesty get in the way of a good story, begin the time honored tradition of jostling for future glory. But to their visible irritation, they are not alone in their ambitions. A small band of Plataeans, easily spotted by their accents and slightly less battered armor have taken up residence at the edge of the Athenian ranks, and they are not shy about their contributions. You, of course, are caught somewhere in the middle. You know the official story. The Plataeans marched from their distant city with all their fighting men, eager to help Athens in its hour of need. It sounds noble, and perhaps it even is, but the reality is muddier, literally so, considering the state of everyone's sandals after a week in the marshes. The Plataeans look tired, but underneath their fatigue is a spark of pride, which flares up whenever the subject of gratitude arises. The first disputes are, as always, disguised as banter. An Athenian soldier will casually mention how nice it is that the Plataeans showed up, and a Plataean will just as casually remind him that without Plataea, Athens would be rather lonely out here, facing the Persian tide alone. The words are polite enough, but the tone sharpens with every repetition. As darkness deepens and wine becomes more abundant, if no less watery, the conversation grows livelier. Soon it is not just soldiers, but officers, priests, and even a few tired farmers weighing in. Some Athenians suggest that Plataea should be grateful for Athens's protection over the years. A statement greeted with such laughter by the Plataeans that several spill their rations. Protection? One Plataean scoffs. We remember that protection mostly involves Athens borrowing our grain and never returning our donkeys. This sets off a round of stories about grain, donkeys, and other small debts accumulated and never quite settled between the two cities. You listen, fascinated by the ability of men facing death to remember the precise details of a 6-year old dispute about a lost cartwheel. As the moon rises, the mood in the camp grows both boastful and slightly melancholy. The Plataeans, though few in number, Herodotus is nearby, counting, of course, and mumbling something about a round figure of 1,000, make their presence felt through sheer force of will. When our sons ask who stood with Athens, one Plataean says, lifting his cup, they will hear that we were not afraid. An Athenian nearby, not to be outdone, proclaims that Athens will never forget the debt owed to Plataea. His friend, less sentimental, whispers that the Athenians forget everything except their own victories. You have to admit, he is probably right. It becomes a sort of contest. Who can speak most grandly about sacrifice and solidarity? Who can describe the journey here in the most heroic terms? Who can invoke the names of ancestors as if reciting the family tree will somehow guarantee a place in tomorrow's glory? By the third round of this unofficial competition, everyone is both inspired and exhausted. The officers, noticing that the argument is drifting dangerously close to genuine resentment, intervene with promises. They assure the Plataeans that their names will be recorded alongside the Athenians in the chronicles. The Plataeans nod, unconvinced. You can see in their eyes a lifetime's experience of being politely thanked and quietly forgotten. Herodotus, ever the opportunist, drifts through the crowd like a specter, scribbling down every oath and promise, every boast and joke. You catch a fragment of his notes. Plataeans insist on equal honor. Athenians make many promises. Suspect future historians will forget this. You wonder if he will write it that way, or if he will tidy it up for dramatic effect. In any case, you are sure the Plataeans will make sure their side of the story survives, even if they have to carve it on stone. Late in the night, as campfires burn low and the last of the bread is chewed into submission, you overhear one final, weary conversation. A Plataean, speaking to his own son, says, "If Athens wins tomorrow, they will say it was their victory. If we lose, they will say it was our fault. But if we stand together, if we survive, they cannot take that away from us." His son nods, silent and scared, but perhaps a little proud. You lie back on your thin blanket, staring at the indifferent stars, and reflect on the curious nature of honor. Here at Marathon, in the shadow of 1,000 petty arguments, it seems that everyone wants to be remembered, even if it is only as a footnote. You suspect that centuries from now, some historian will mention the Plataeans' loyalty, and 1,000 school children will promptly forget it. But tonight, as voices fade and the promise of battle hangs heavy in the air, the need to be seen, to be acknowledged, feels as urgent as hunger. As sleep finally claims you, you wonder whether the gods, so frequently invoked, are listening to these squabbles or merely rolling their eyes at the persistence of human vanity. Either way, you know that tomorrow's stories will belong to those who survive to tell them, and to those, like Herodotus, who never miss a word. At last, with bread distributed, wine thinned to the point of homeopathy, and the Plataeans more or less appeased, the time comes to talk of tactics. The very word is enough to make even the bravest soldier's eyes glaze over. In the popular imagination, tactics are the stuff of heroic decisions and cunning feints. In the Athenian camp, they are the domain of older men with furrowed brows, dust smudged scrolls, and voices honed by decades of fruitless committee meetings. You find yourself summoned to the gathering where the strategoi, those illustrious generals, whose names will one day confuse generations of students, stand around a stick drawn diagram in the sand. At first glance, it looks as though a flock of chickens has staged a protest on the beach. But no, these lines represent the sacred plan that will decide the fate of Greece. Or, as one of the strategoi mutters, the plan for how best to avoid disaster, assuming the gods are in a particularly generous mood. The main topic of debate: depth versus width. Should the phalanx, the great Greek wall of shields and spears, be deep and dense, risking the flanks, or wide and thin, risking the center? The argument is heated, not because anyone expects to discover a new military truth, but because every officer wants to be the one blamed by future generations if things go wrong. One general gestures grandly, tracing a thick, hopeful line for the Athenian right wing. Here, we place our best men shoulder to shoulder, 8 ranks deep. They will be unstoppable. Another shakes his head and points to the center, already dangerously thin. And when the center collapses, Do we ask the gods to plug the gap? The first shrugs. The gods are invoked more often as an excuse than as a strategy. You hear talk of spear length, an obsession that seems to transcend time and culture. Some favor the traditional dory, a spear of 7 or 8 feet. Others, citing the reach of Persian arrows, suggest longer spears, even at the risk of losing maneuverability. The debate quickly devolves into the practicalities of carrying, sharpening, and, most importantly, retrieving dropped spears in the heat of battle. A veteran, his tunic stained with yesterday's wine, mutters that it hardly matters how long the spear is if the man holding it cannot stand his ground. Shields are another subject of almost theological intensity. The hoplon, heavy and curved, is praised for its protection and cursed for its weight. Some suggest lighter shields would allow greater speed. Others argue that speed is a luxury afforded only to the living. A compromise is reached, as always, by doing nothing new. There is also the question of signals. Should the attack begin at dawn, at a signal from the generals, or when the sun glints off the Persian shields? Each method has its advocates. The veterans point out that any signal more complex than advance will be lost amid the din and dust. The younger men, eager to impress, argue for elaborate prearranged shouts and gestures. You suspect that in the chaos, most men will simply follow the loudest voice nearby, whether it is an officer, a priest, or a particularly enthusiastic goat. As for formations, the strategoi eventually settle on something close to tradition, a solid phalanx, the strongest men on the flanks, the center thinner and, if you are honest, rather expendable. You do not know if this is true strategy or simply an attempt to make the best of what is available. You suspect it is the latter. Amid all this, someone asks about the Persian cavalry. Should the Greeks anchor their line on the marshes to protect against a flanking maneuver, or spread out across the open plain? The question hangs in the air like a mosquito, annoying and impossible to swat. A compromise is reached naturally that leaves everyone dissatisfied. Eventually, the plan is finalized, or as finalized as anything ever is before a battle. The generals step back, dusting sand from their hands, as if this act alone will change the odds. They remind the men that discipline is the shield of the army, and courage is the greatest weapon. You notice that neither saying provides any guidance about what to do when you are being trampled by Persian horses. The soldiers are gathered and the plan explained. This is done with the usual combination of optimism and omission. The officers talk at length about glory, but gloss over the likelihood of wounds, death, or worse, ignominious retreat. They describe the flanks as strong and brave, the center as resilient and loyal, and everyone as essential to victory. You try to remember which part of the line you have been assigned to, but by now the words are blurring together. There is a long, weary silence after the briefing. Men return to their fires and their dreams of home, pondering the difference between tactics and fate. Some take solace in the detail, as if memorizing every inch of the plan will keep them safe. Others prefer not to think about it at all, convinced that tomorrow will bring only chaos, regardless of how many times a line is drawn in the sand. You drift away from the generals, your mind numb from too many words and too little certainty. As you pass a group of soldiers, you overhear one say, "The Persians have more men, more horses, and longer bows. We have more plans. Maybe they will trip over them." You cannot help but smile at the bleak humor. In the end, tactics are like everything else at Marathon, complicated in theory, terrifying in practice, and above all, an endless source of argument. Tomorrow, you will find out whether the plan holds, or whether, like the last of the bread, it crumbles under pressure. You lie down, spear at your side, shield beneath your head, and hope that, when the time comes, you will remember your part in the great, tedious, deadly dance that is Greek tactics. Or at the very least, you will not be the first to run. Night falls at Marathon with a sigh, as if the earth itself is tired of waiting. Darkness is thick and restless, interrupted by the crackle of distant campfires and the low drone of men who, despite every physical exhaustion, cannot or will not close their eyes. Sleep, which usually claims even the bravest after a long day's march, seems suddenly as distant as the gods. You lie there, wrapped in your cloak, staring up at a sky so cluttered with stars that it looks on the verge of collapse. Around you, other soldiers mutter in the half light, a scatter of stories, questions, and confessions. For once, nobody talks about bread or tactics. Instead, they talk of families left behind, of debts unpaid, of embarrassing stories from childhood, and of the small, persistent regrets that only rise to the surface when sleep refuses to come. Someone on your left counts the stars aloud, voice barely above a whisper. He gets as far as 37 before he loses track, sighs, and starts again. Another soldier polishes his shield in the dark, less to prepare for battle than to keep his hands from trembling. The camp is filled with the soft noises of men pretending not to be afraid. You can smell the oil from the shields, the sweat in the air, and the sharp tang of anxiety. In one corner of the camp, a group of the youngest hoplites gather. They are too restless to sleep and too proud to admit they want to. They huddle close, inventing games to pass the hours. One proposes a contest. Who can tell the biggest lie about tomorrow's victory? The winner claims he will single-handedly capture the Persian king and carry him to Athens in a sack. The others laugh, and for a moment, the fear breaks. Others simply sit in silence, lost in thought. You recognize the look, eyes fixed on nothing, jaw clenched, mind drifting between dread and hope. Some stare at the distant fires of the Persian camp, trying to estimate their numbers by the flickering glow, always arriving at numbers just large enough to make the heart sink. For some, tomorrow is a problem to be solved. For most, it is a wall to be climbed, or perhaps only endured. Not far away, a pair of older soldiers swap stories about previous campaigns, small skirmishes, and grand defeats. each tale more outlandish than the last. One claims to have fought a lion on the way to Marathon. The other retorts that he once ate nothing but olives for 40 days and still managed to outmarch the Spartans. You suspect both are lying, but nobody cares. These stories are not for the truth, but for the comfort they bring in the retelling. Elsewhere, the priests wander the camp, offering quiet prayers and half hearted reassurances. The gods favor the bold, they whisper, though their eyes say otherwise. Some soldiers ask for blessings, others roll over, muttering that blessings never stopped an arrow. A few, practical to the end, ask only that the gods grant them a quick end if things go badly. As midnight creeps closer, a cold wind rises off the bay. Cloaks are pulled tighter, teeth chatter. Someone begins to hum a lullaby, the melody wandering between hope and homesickness. It is picked up by another voice, then another, until the camp is filled with a quiet chorus of men pretending, just for a moment, that they are anywhere but here. You notice, with some surprise, that not everyone is wide awake. A few lucky souls manage to find sleep, snoring gently, undisturbed by the magnitude of tomorrow. You envy them. They will remember none of this: the waiting, the worry, the long empty stretch of time before dawn. You do not sleep. You try, more out of habit than hope, shifting on the hard ground, arranging and rearranging your cloak. You try to remember prayers from your childhood. You try to think of home, of safe things, of the taste of fresh bread, of laughter echoing in a sunlit courtyard. Nothing works. Every time you close your eyes, they snap open, drawn to the sounds and shapes of men who cannot rest. Somewhere nearby, Herodotus sits hunched over his wax tablets, recording every sigh, every restless motion, every half heard conversation. You wonder what he will make of this, whether he will describe a camp of brave men staring boldly into the future, or a camp of frightened children, wide eyed and sleepless. You suspect it will depend on who is reading. Time drags. The stars shift. The fires burn low. For hours, nothing happens, and yet everything happens. 1,000 small acts of endurance, of defiance, of pretending not to be afraid. This is the part of battle nobody sings about. This is the part that will vanish from the stories, the waiting, the long, slow, dark before history decides who is worth remembering. At last, a thin, pale light begins to leak over the horizon. Men sit up, stretching stiff limbs and blinking into the gray dawn. No one says it, but you can see it on every face. The wish that the night could have lasted longer, or at least that the day would never begin. You join them, standing, adjusting your armor, taking your place in the endless, silent line. As you ready yourself for what comes next, you realize that this sleepless night, this quiet misery, will be the thing you remember longest, if you are lucky enough to remember anything at all. Dawn comes without drama. The sun creeps up, as indifferent as ever to human concerns, shining on a landscape unchanged except for the stiff, weary bodies of thousands of men who have spent the night wishing for sleep and dreading the day. You rub your eyes, stretch out the stiffness, and try not to look at the faces around you, each one as pale and jumpy as your own. The order to form up comes not as a trumpet blast, but as a series of muttered reminders, shouted corrections, and tired curses. Hoplites shuffle into line, squinting at the horizon, counting shields and checking spear points. You find your place in the phalanx, shoulder to shoulder with men you know well and others you met only yesterday. Nobody says a word. This is no time for speeches. Somewhere to the side, a thin, nervous man attempts a joke about the world's first marathon, but nobody laughs. The only sound is the clatter of armor, the distant bray of a donkey, and the rhythmic creak of 1,000 anxious knees. You steal a look at the Persian lines, which stretch farther than you care to measure, their banners bright and defiant in the morning sun. They seem unhurried, confident, well fed and well rested, unlike the Greeks. The Strategoi move up and down the line, offering last minute instructions and, in a few cases, heartfelt prayers. You watch as one general fumbles with his helmet, cursing the chin strap, and think, if this is the last thing I see, it is not exactly inspiring. There is no heroic pause, no moment where time stops. There is only the sudden, simple order: advance. And so you run. It is not the glorious charge you imagined as a child. It is a controlled panic, a headlong rush across uneven ground, all sharp rocks and scrubby grass. You grip your shield tight, trying to ignore the jarring thump of each footfall. The whole line moves together, at first slow, then faster, driven by the certainty that every second brings you closer to the Persian archer's range. Because that is the true reason for the run, not courage, not zeal, but sheer, practical terror. The Persians have bows, many, many bows. You have seen their arrows, black and thin, sticking up from the ground after the occasional morning volley. The stories say their arrows fall like rain. You believe it. Some part of you expects the world to narrow into a single clear focus, the way poets describe. But as you run, your mind scatters in all directions. You worry about stumbling. You worry about your sandals coming loose. You worry about tripping over your own spear. The man beside you is breathing hard. The man on your left looks as if he might faint. Ahead, the ground dips and rises. No friendly stadium, this, but a treacherous field, with every step an invitation to disaster. You remember to keep the line. That is the thing drilled into you. Do not break formation. You are not alone, and that is both comfort and curse. If you fall, there is no time to help. If you stagger, there is no room for error. The men on either side are counting on you, just as you are counting on them. As the line draws nearer to the Persian ranks, you can see faces now, dark-eyed men behind wicker shields, watching your approach with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. You wonder if they are as nervous as you are. You doubt it. Their bows are already raised. A shout goes up, the signal to close ranks and brace for impact. You lower your spear, angle your shield, and try to forget everything you know about how battles usually end. Then come the arrows. You do not see the first volley, but you hear it. The high, thin whine as 1,000 arrows cut the air, followed by the slap of wood and the soft, dreadful sounds of arrows meeting flesh. You keep running. There is no choice. Some men fall, some stumble, others simply grit their teeth and keep moving. All at once, you are there. The world collapses into noise and violence, shouts, screams, the thunder of shields smashing together. You thrust your spear, aiming for anything that is not Athenian bronze. There is no plan, no poetry, only the desperate hope that you will come out the other side. For a moment, the Persian line holds. Their shields overlap. Their spears jab forward. Their archers knock arrows as quickly as they can. You hear the clash of metal, the groan of men pressed too close, the barked orders in a dozen languages. The ground beneath your feet is slick with dew, or is it something else? Then, slowly, the Greek momentum tells. The center surges forward, and you are swept up in it, hardly able to breathe. For a moment, you are part of something larger than yourself, an unstoppable wave of noise and motion. You remember the stories, how heroes are forged in the chaos of battle, and you laugh bitterly at the thought. Because in truth, you're not thinking about glory or destiny. You are thinking about how much you want this to end and how badly you wish you had eaten a better breakfast. When the line finally grinds to a halt, you find yourself gasping for breath, sweat stinging your eyes, shield heavy as lead. All around you, men are shouting, struggling, pushing back against the Persian line. You can hear the cries of the wounded, the commands of officers, and, somewhere in the distance, the relentless thrum of archers readying another volley. This is it, the moment of truth, the one that nobody really wanted, but none could avoid. You are at the heart of the battle, with no way out but forward. Tomorrow, perhaps, the poets will speak of courage and cunning, but you will remember the run, the noise, the confusion, the mindless, necessary panic that brought you here, not as a hero, but as a man who simply did what he must. And even now, as the line sways and buckles, you think how utterly ridiculous it all is, and how you would give anything to be running for sport and not for your life. The first lesson of battle you are learning is that fear has a sound. It is not, as you might imagine, the clatter of armor or the clash of spear on shield. No, fear on the field of Marathon is the whirring, uncanny hiss of arrows slicing the air, dozens, then hundreds, then thousands, released with a synchronization that could only have come from months of practice or years of habit. You do not see the archers at first. You simply see the sky darken in the corners of your eyes. Persian archers are spoken of with respect, if not outright terror. It is said that in battle, their arrows come so thick that they blot out the sun. Someone nearby, making a feeble attempt at humor, mutters, "Then we shall fight in the shade." But the laugh dies before it can fully form. You grip your shield tighter. You do not want to find out what it is like to fight in the shade of arrows. The Persians themselves seem unnaturally calm, standing in orderly ranks, their bows held high, quivers slung at their hips, and fingers already notched and ready. You realize, with an odd flash of envy, that these men have probably never had to listen to an Athenian argue tactics for half a night. They know their job, and their job is, for the moment, to send you and your companions running for your lives. You hear the signal, a shout in a language you do not know, followed by a sharp, collective intake of breath. Then, with a movement as smooth as the wind over the Aegean, the first line of archers draws and releases. The arrows arc high, rising and falling in perfect, terrifying order. Some fly wide, some fall short. A few whistle over your head and land somewhere behind, lost in the grass and sand. Others, with the cruel precision that can only come from years of repetition, find their marks. There is nothing romantic about being under fire. The arrows do not single out the brave or the timid. They simply fall, obeying no will but the cruel, simple science of trajectory. You learn very quickly that luck is more important than valor. The man beside you, quiet, capable, someone you shared your rations with only an hour before, crumples with a shaft through his leg. Another stumbles, cursing as his shield vibrates with the impact. Someone far to the left shrieks, a sound that rises above the battle, high and desperate. The Greeks press on because there is no other choice. To stop is to die. To fall is to be trampled. The line surges, stalls, then surges again. You do your best to keep your shield high and your head down. The generals had assured everyone that the hoplon, a good, thick round of wood and bronze, would turn aside all but the fiercest shots. You wonder if any of the generals have ever actually stood here with arrows raining down like a punishing hail. You notice, with a strange detachment, that not all the Persian arrows hit their targets. Many land harmlessly in the earth, quivering among the tufts of wild grass. Some archers, perhaps nervous or overeager, send their shots too high, and they drift into the morning, lost to the wind and the gods. A few, you cannot help but notice, seem to aim nowhere at all, sending arrows into the marshes, the sea, or the open air. You suspect that for every deadly archer, there are two who simply hope for the best. Still, enough of them are skilled, and the arrows keep coming. It is a kind of madness, this relentless, senseless waste of wood and iron, as if the Persians believe that victory can be purchased one arrow at a time. You hear stories, old tales told by those who claim to have seen Persian bowmen at work before, that the archers are trained from childhood, that their arms are as strong as blacksmiths, that some can strike a bird from the sky at 50 paces. Today, you do not doubt it. You realize, with a kind of fatalistic amusement, that no amount of training prepares a man for this. All the drilling, the lectures on formation and spear work, the prayers and sacrifices, none of it matters when the air itself is against you. For every man who keeps moving, another falls or is forced to stop, checking for wounds, picking arrows out of shield rims, cursing the luck that brought him to this muddy field. Eventually, the Greeks close the distance, and the arrows lose much of their force and frequency. Archers are not built for close combat. Their weapons are too long, their armor too light. You see them now, retreating behind their infantry, scrambling to find safety behind the massed ranks of men with spears. The sky is lighter, the air clearer, and you risk lowering your shield, if only for a moment. Your arms ache, your knees tremble, but you are alive. You look back at the ground behind you, now littered with arrows, more than you care to count. Some stand upright like the stalks of a grisly field. Others are buried deep or snapped underfoot. You think, not for the first time, that there must be a better way to settle arguments than by filling the landscape with sharp objects and frightened men. For now, the archers are spent, their moment of terror replaced by the more intimate horror of hand to hand fighting. The hoplite line crashes forward, and the world contracts to the distance between your shield and the man in front of you. Later, if you live, you will have nightmares of arrows, falling forever, always just behind your shield, always looking for you. But for now, the noise of arrows is drowned by the noise of men, and the day moves on, indifferent to whose side the gods may favor, and completely oblivious to the science or luck of the Persian bow. If you thought the anticipation, the waiting, and the running were the hardest parts, you were wrong. It is only when the lines meet, shields slamming against shields, spears jabbing over the rims, men screaming out names, curses, or just nothing at all, that you discover how truly tedious and dreadful close combat can be. All the old stories suggest a kind of ballet, with heroes picking out their enemies and trading witty remarks between blows. The reality is something more like a mass argument in a very crowded marketplace, only with much higher stakes. You, like everyone else, are swept up in the surge. The phalanx tightens, the ranks press closer, and suddenly your entire world is the curved back of the man in front, the edge of your shield, and a thin, shifting slice of daylight above enemy helmets. Vision narrows, hearing is just as selective. You catch only snatches of meaning amid the thunder of armor and the grunts of effort. Someone calling for help, another cursing the slippery ground, a third just shouting wordless defiance. It is not elegant. Most stabbings are not. You lunge forward with your spear, trying for a gap in the Persian shields. Sometimes you meet nothing but air, sometimes wood, sometimes, with a sickening jolt, something softer. Your arm shakes after every blow, more from surprise than exertion. The man next to you drops his spear and fumbles for a sword, only to find the scabbard tangled in his cloak. Someone else, further down the line, tries to swing a rock, as if all the weapons of Greece have been exhausted and only blunt force remains. For a while, nobody seems to know who is winning. The Greek center, thinner than the flanks, bends under the pressure of the Persian advance. The lines buckle and sway, much like a badly built wall under too much weight. For a few heartbeats, you worry that this is it, that the Persians will break through, that the plan is unraveling, that soon all you will see are foreign faces and raised blades. But then, almost as if by accident, the Greek flanks start to fold inward, squeezing the Persian sides. You can see little of this, only the growing confusion among the enemy, the uncertain steps backward, the press of men who realize there is nowhere left to go but into each other. The famous double envelopment, so beloved by future historians, feels from the inside less like strategy and more like being caught in a traffic jam made of screaming, sweating, frightened people. There is little room for personal glory. Every move is dictated by the crowd, the jostle, the urge to survive just one more minute. If you kill a man, you hardly notice. If you are wounded, it may take several moments to realize it. You see a Persian soldier stagger back, dropping his shield. His face is so young that you wonder if he even knows why he is here. Someone else, a fellow Athenian maybe, stumbles past, helmet missing, eyes wide with shock, mouthing something about his brother. There is no time to help, no time to think. The ground underfoot grows treacherous, slick with mud, and worse. You fight for your footing as much as for your life. The clangor of metal is broken now and then by a more intimate sound, a gasp, a whimper, a cry for mother or the gods. These are not the noises of heroes, but of men. The battle is not won by the bravest or the strongest, but by those who manage, somehow, to keep moving. Occasionally, you remember your training: thrust, step, cover, thrust again, but it is a struggle to apply rules in this chaos. Your spear eventually snaps, and you do not even notice until you try to jab and find your hand empty. With numb fingers, you draw your short sword and continue, hacking blindly at whatever comes close. The shield becomes your world. It blocks blows, shoves back the enemy, and if you are lucky, gives you a place to hide for a heartbeat or two. At some point, you realize that the Persians are falling back. The line that once seemed endless is beginning to fray, to twist and fragment under pressure. Some Persians break and run, only to be hemmed in by their own retreating comrades. Others dig in, fighting with the desperation of men who know they are out of options. You find yourself gasping for breath, surprised to be alive, shocked that your arms still move. The Greek shouting grows louder, words you barely recognize, drowned out by exhaustion and the dull roar in your ears. You are winning, or so it seems. You expect elation, some surge of triumph. Instead, you just feel tired. The enemy is retreating, but there is no chase, no grand pursuit, just a slow, relentless press, like a tide rising over drowned stones. As the immediate fighting slackens, You look down and see your sandals stained red and brown. You think of all the times you worried about blisters, and the absurdity makes you want to laugh. Around you, men slump to their knees, leaning on shields or searching for dropped weapons. Nobody cheers, nobody boasts. There is only the silence of survivors, broken by the groans of the wounded and the weary sighs of men who realize the worst may be over, at least for now. Later, perhaps, you will tell stories about who stabbed whom first, about acts of heroism and cunning feints. But you know the truth. Most of it was chaos, luck, and the grim, boring determination to keep going when every part of you wanted to stop. The poets will invent glory, but you will remember only the noise, the weight, and the endless struggle not to be the one who fell first. And so, with the sun now climbing high and the dust settling on a field no longer quite so crowded, you catch your breath and wait to see what the rest of the day has in store, half hoping, half dreading that the worst is behind you, and knowing deep down that the stories told in years to come will never quite match the reality you just survived. You have always heard that battles are decided by the living, but standing on the battered field of Marathon, you realize that the dead and the wounded have their own relentless gravity. The line holds, the enemy wavers, and yet, everywhere you look, there are small reminders that victory is always paid for and always at the most inconvenient time. You notice it first at your feet, a dropped helmet split down the side with a smear of something red and alarming on the cheek guard. Someone's sandal still laced but without a foot. The shape of a man curled up on his side, as if simply napping in the sun, though the angle of his arm tells another story. These are the details the poets will skip. The living step around the fallen, too tired or too frightened to look down for long. Nearby, two soldiers, brothers perhaps, are kneeling beside a third who is not moving. They whisper words that are lost to the noise, but you catch the tone, half desperate, half resigned. It is a sound you recognize from elsewhere, at funerals or sick beds, but here it is raw and public. A priest passes by, already dusted in blood and dirt, muttering a prayer as he makes a sign over the body. You wonder if the gods are listening, or if they have heard so many similar prayers that they simply let them slide off into the wind. Not all the wounded are silent. One young hoplite clutches his thigh, blood streaming between his fingers, his voice rising in panicked pleas for water or for his mother, whichever arrives first. You search for something to offer: cloth, encouragement, a lie about how it will be all right. But you find yourself just standing there, lost for words, guilty in your own relative health. You make a silent promise to remember his face, though you know memory is as unreliable as mercy. Elsewhere, the wounded are carried or dragged toward the rear, where a makeshift tent now serves as the most unpopular spot in all of Greece, the surgeon's corner. It is a grim scene. The healers work with knives, not magic. Their remedies are simple and brutal. Wounds are cauterized with hot iron, broken bones set with rough splints. The air is thick with the smell of blood, herbs, and burning flesh. If this is what victory smells like, you are no longer sure it is worth the trouble. You find yourself counting how many men you knew this morning are still standing. Herodotus, appearing as if summoned by your discomfort, is making a tally. He asks survivors their names and the names of their fallen friends. He jots down numbers with practiced detachment, murmuring, "For the record, you understand." You do not understand. Numbers do not capture the sound of a friend's voice, the warmth of laughter shared over bread, the awkward silence of a man realizing his brother is not coming home. Someone attempts a joke. At least now there will be more rations for the rest of us, and the attempt lands somewhere between tasteless and necessary. You realize, not for the first time, that humor is a flimsy shield against what comes after the fighting. Another man, much older, sits with his back to a rock, shaking his head and repeating the same phrase. So many, so quickly, so many, so quickly. His voice is thin, like thread stretched too far. The officers walk among the survivors, checking on the wounded and quietly taking note of who is no longer reporting for duty. The lists grow longer with each pass. Still, the dead are collected with as much dignity as the moment allows, laid out in rough rows, shields for markers, a cloak or a scrap of tunic pulled over the faces. The process is quick, but not careless. Nobody wants to think too much about what must come next. There is talk of burial. A few argue for immediate rites, citing omens and the risk of disease. Others insist that the dead should be brought home to their families, that memory is a thing best preserved in familiar earth. The debate is half-hearted. Nobody has the energy for a real argument. In the end, practicality wins. Graves will be dug here in the stony soil of Marathon, and the names will be carried back by those who survive. You find yourself looking at your own hands, dirty, shaking, stained with things you do not want to name. You wonder how you will describe this day if you ever try to explain it. Will you talk about the charge, the crash, the victory? Or will you talk about the quiet in between, the terrible silence of counting the missing? As the sun creeps higher, the noise of battle fades, replaced by the lower, sadder chorus of the aftermath. The men who can still walk move with careful steps, avoiding the worst of the carnage, trying not to remember the faces of those they step around. The ones who cannot walk are lifted or left, depending on the circumstances. No songs are sung. The only music is the scrape of shovels in the rocky dirt. In the coming years, the names of the fallen will be carved on stone. 192, they will say, or perhaps more, or perhaps less, depending on who is doing the counting. But you know that each number hides 100 small stories: a missing shoe, a forgotten prayer, a laugh at the wrong moment. The casualties are not just statistics, they are the texture of memory, the rough grain that makes victory a bitter, necessary meal. Later, when the speeches are given and the poets compose their verses, Nobody will mention how the smell of blood lingered long after the victory, or how the bravest man you knew died clutching a pebble from his mother's garden. But you will remember, in the quiet moments, the little things that ruined the mood, and you will carry them with you long after Marathon is only a name in a story. You always imagined that in the decisive moments of a great battle, there would be clarity, some flash of inspiration, some thunderous revelation of who is winning and who is doomed. Instead, you find yourself in the very heart of confusion. The Greeks push forward, the Persians begin to break, and suddenly nothing makes sense except the fact that everywhere you look, people are running, some toward victory, some away from disaster, all equally desperate. It begins at the flanks. You do not see it at first. You are too busy trying not to trip over discarded shields and the bodies of the fallen. But the news spreads through the Greek line with a peculiar electricity. The Persian sides are folding, retreating, crumpling in the face of the Athenian charge. The fabled Persian discipline, which had seemed so imposing when they arrived on their endless ships, now appears as fragile as clay in the rain. At first, it is only a trickle, a few men stepping back, shields raised not to fight, but to cover their retreat. You glimpse archers dropping their bows, slinging on short swords, and shouting at one another in confusion. Their commanders wave banners, scream orders, but the meaning is lost in the noise. You realize, with a strange detachment, that language is the least of their problems. Panic is universal. The Greeks, to their credit, are not much better organized. The plan, the beautiful sand drawn lines from the previous night, has dissolved. The phalanx is now a surging, chaotic mass. Some soldiers press forward with all the discipline they can muster. Others, sensing victory, abandon formation and give chase. A few are so exhausted that they simply stand and watch, stunned by the sudden reversal. You are one of those who pauses, not out of bravery, not out of wisdom, but because your legs have finally decided they have had enough. So you stand in the growing dust and simply observe as the great Persian army, conquerors of kingdoms, descend into a tangle of flight and confusion. The Persian center, which had pushed forward with so much confidence, now finds itself exposed. The Greek wings fold in, creating a crescent that tightens with every heartbeat. The Persians shout, push, and try to rally, but the momentum is gone. Their line, which had once seemed endless, becomes porous. Men stumble backward, tripping over one another. Some throw down their shields to run faster, while others clutch desperately at banners or friends, hoping for order in the chaos. For a few terrifying moments, the battle is nothing but confusion. A Persian officer rides past, shouting commands you cannot understand. He waves a curved sword, trying to rally his men. Instead, he is nearly dragged from his horse by soldiers eager to escape. You wonder what it must be like to see your army collapse around you, to know that all the planning, all the pride has come to this, a race to the boats. the retreat turns into a rout. Some Persians head for the marshes, seeking any escape from the Greek advance. Others run toward the waiting ships, splashing into the shallows, throwing themselves onto boats already overcrowded and listing dangerously. You see one ship capsize as too many men scramble aboard. Others drift away from the shore, leaving their countrymen behind. On the edge of the water, a group of Persian soldiers turn and make a final, desperate stand. They fight not for victory, but for the chance to live another day. The Greeks, breathless and battered, are slow to pursue. Some, remembering the warnings of their generals, hold back, unwilling to risk the chaos of the marshes. Others, fueled by adrenaline and anger, plunge forward, chasing the Persians through reeds and mud. There is little discipline now, only the thrill of the chase and the instinct to make sure the enemy does not return. For a few moments, you simply stand and watch. The field is a jumble of bodies, broken weapons, lost helmets, and the unmistakable sounds of panic. The air is thick with dust, sweat, and the briny tang of the sea. Farther away, you spot a group of Persian archers, now reduced to using their bows as clubs. Their arrows are gone, their dignity with them. Amid all this, you notice something odd. Not everyone is fleeing. A handful of Persian soldiers, perhaps the famous immortals, though they look just as mortal as anyone else, form a knot near their commanders. They hold their ground, fighting with grim determination. The Greeks hesitate before them, uncertain. For a moment, the chaos pauses, as if even disaster needs to catch its breath. Then, as the knot is finally broken, the rout resumes in earnest. You realize, watching the collapse, that there is no dignity in mass retreat. The Persians, who began the day with banners flying and drums beating, are now reduced to a mob, each man for himself. Their officers are powerless, their discipline is lost. All that remains is the urge to escape. Eventually, the Greeks begin to regroup. The pursuit falters, the marshes swallow the slowest, and the beach is littered with discarded gear. You see men embracing, shouting, even laughing in disbelief. The impossible has happened. The Persians are leaving, and you are still here. You look down at your hands, still trembling, still dirty, still alive. Around you, the field is quieting. The noise of battle fades, replaced by the ragged breathing of men who cannot believe what they have just seen. And in that moment, as you watch the Persians disappear onto their ships, you are left with the strangest feeling of all. Not triumph, not relief, but the nagging, unanswerable question of what comes next, now that confusion has given way to the dull reality of survival. It is a strange thing to win a battle and feel not victorious. The poets and orators will later sing of glorious triumph, of the Persian menace driven into the sea, and the courage of free men shining like the morning sun. But here you are, standing in the aftermath of Marathon, and the only thing that shines is the sweat clinging to every inch of your aching skin. Victory, as it turns out, is quiet. The battlefield is full of men blinking in disbelief, breathing hard, looking around as if expecting someone to declare that it was all a misunderstanding and that the Persians will be back in a moment just to finish the job properly. The Greek line, such as it is, wavers and sags. Shields drop to the ground with a clatter. A few men fall to their knees, either in thanks or because their legs have simply given up. You expect shouts of joy, songs, wild cheers. Instead, there is a stunned hush. No one seems quite sure what to do next. A general stands on a rock and tries to say something inspiring, but his voice cracks and trails off, lost in the breeze. The only person who seems happy is Herodotus, already scribbling away, pausing every few lines to survey the scene with a historian's detached delight. You wonder if he is writing the truth or simply the version he wishes he had witnessed. Around you, the business of victory begins, not the glory, but the chores. Men wander in search of water or bread, limping through the trampled grass and muddy ruts. You watch a line of hoplites try to wipe blood and grime from their shields, only to discover that some stains are here to stay. Someone makes a joke about inventing a new type of cleaning cloth, strong enough for battle, gentle enough for bronze. The laugh is weak, but it is something. A pair of older soldiers argue about who struck the decisive blow. Neither can remember the details. I think it was when they ran, one insists. No, it was before that, with the shouting. There was a lot of shouting. They fall silent, staring out at the sea. The Persians, those invincible conquerors, are now just shapes on distant ships, their banners fluttering like the last breath of a bad dream. Somewhere nearby, the first scavengers begin their grim rounds. The dead are checked for valuables, rings, coins, even intact sandals. The mood is somber. For every man searching, there is another staring into the middle distance, lost in thoughts of home or memory, or nothing at all. You realize that winning, at least here and now, is just a word for being less unlucky than someone else. The wounded are everywhere. A groan, a whispered plea, the clink of a water jug. These are the sounds of victory. The surgeons get to work, now with fewer distractions, but greater exhaustion. You hear one mutter, "Next time, let the gods fight it out themselves." You silently agree. There is a sense that nobody knows what to do with their hands. The ones who can start cleaning their gear or helping the wounded. Others sit in circles, passing a wineskin around, drinking in silence. It is not celebration, but necessity, the ritual of men who have nothing else to hold on to. You see a young hoplite staring at his own reflection in the back of his shield. He looks older than he did this morning. Maybe he is. You feel the weight of fatigue deeper than the ache in your muscles, and you wonder if it will ever leave. A rumor spreads that someone found a Persian helmet made of gold. Others claim the Persians dropped a chest of silver coins. The stories grow more absurd with each retelling, strange, desperate attempts to turn this strange victory into something worth remembering, or perhaps just something less dull. A priest moves among the survivors, intoning thanks to Athena and Zeus, though he sounds as tired as everyone else. No one objects. The gods get their share, as usual, but the real gratitude is for whoever remembered to pack the wine. Somewhere in the middle of the chaos, an officer tries to organize a list of the dead and wounded. It quickly devolves into confusion as names are shouted, misheard, repeated, or forgotten. The numbers become fluid: 200 dead, or 192, or maybe a bit more or less, depending on who is counting and whether they have eaten. Victory does not taste sweet, it tastes of dust, sweat, and disappointment. You watch as men argue over whose turn it is to fetch water, whose shield has the deepest dent, whose story of the day is most tragic or hilarious. The Greeks have won, but the mood is that of men cleaning up after a particularly rowdy festival, not quite sure what happened, but certain that someone will have to tidy up. As the sun begins to sink and the long shadows stretch over the field, you finally allow yourself to sit. Your legs shake, your back aches, and you stare out at the Aegean, where the enemy is already nothing more than a memory on the horizon. Tomorrow, Athens will rejoice. Tomorrow, the city will ring with songs and speeches, with stories of courage and unity. But here, on the field where it happened, the feeling is more complicated. You have survived, and that is something. But victory, you think, is not the shining thing the poets promised. It is quieter, heavier, and much, much lonelier. You close your eyes, letting the weariness seep in, and think. Perhaps that is why people keep telling stories about these battles. Not to relive the glory, but to make sense of the strange, empty quiet that follows, and to fill the silence with something, anything, other than the truth. When the shouting fades and the sun climbs higher, the field of Marathon begins to resemble not a stage for legends, but a tedious math problem, one that no one particularly wants to solve. The Persians are gone, the Greeks are still standing, and now it is time for the reckoning. Not the heroic kind, but the literal, mundane counting of bodies. You never considered yourself a lover of numbers, but now you are surrounded by them. Officers, their armor still flecked with blood and dust, move from one end of the field to the other, tallying the dead, the wounded, the missing. Herodotus, who has already produced 2 full scrolls today, now follows them at a discreet distance, jotting down figures with an enthusiasm only he could muster for such a grim task. 6,004 Persians, someone declares, standing atop a rock for effect. Another corrects him. No, it was 6,003. That one over there is not quite dead. The debate is brief. They split the difference and write down 6,004, as if precision were more important than the truth. You wonder who will ever check the numbers. Counting Greeks is easier. You are told, repeatedly, that only 192 have fallen. Some men nod in solemn agreement. Others grumble that the true number is higher, but that generals prefer neat stories. Either way, The difference is stark. The field is scattered with Persian corpses, and only here and there, like rare flowers among the carnage, do you find the familiar faces and armor of your own side. But the numbers, for all their importance, are only part of the equation. Now comes the sorting. Which bodies will be claimed? Which buried where they fell? Which families will get news? And which will simply wait forever? You watch as shields are turned over, tunics unfastened, rings and tokens removed from the fingers of the dead. It is a slow, methodical business, and there is little dignity in it, only the heavy silence of men doing what must be done. Someone produces a list, written hastily on a scrap of parchment, and begins calling out names. Those who answer are checked off. Those who do not are given a brief, uncertain moment of silence. Sometimes the names are repeated, just in case someone misheard, or is slow to wake, or is hiding behind a rock to avoid more chores. You find yourself counting, too, not just the dead, but the living. Men you shared jokes with, men who argued about bread, men who, only yesterday, seemed as permanent as the stones on the plain. Now, they are part of the tally, their names drifting into the endless arithmetic of history. The work drags on. The sun is merciless, and every step stirs up dust and the scent of something sweet and terrible. The priests come through, offering final prayers and marking the bodies with sprigs of laurel. You notice that the prayers have grown shorter as the day wears on, as if the gods themselves have become impatient with the repetition. Later, the officers gather again. This time, there are no arguments, only tired voices reciting numbers. 6,004, they say, as if saying it aloud makes it less horrible. 192. They debate how to record the figures, carved into stone, painted on temple walls, committed to memory. Herodotus listens, nods, writes it all down, numbers that will survive long after the details are lost. You wonder who will remember the rest, the wounded men who will never walk straight again, the ones carried back to Athens in carts and on makeshift stretchers, the ones whose names will not be carved anywhere. The arithmetic of the dead is neat. The arithmetic of the living is not. Somewhere nearby, the youngest hoplites are tasked with digging graves. It is not the heroic labor they dreamed of, but it is necessary. The ground is hard, the shovels few, the work is slow and silent, broken only by the occasional outburst when someone unearths a hidden shield or an unexpected bone. The Persians, for the most part, are left where they fell, buried quickly, if at all. The Greeks, though fewer, are laid out with care, their shields lined up in neat rows, their names spoken, if only briefly. As dusk approaches, the numbers are tallied one last time. The lists are handed to the generals, who nod, frown, and tuck them away. Tomorrow, these numbers will become stories, and those stories will become monuments. But tonight, as the last grave is filled and the last name whispered, you feel only the weight of subtraction, the sense that even in victory, Something essential has been lost. The field quiets. The surviving soldiers gather in small groups, not to celebrate, but to rest, to eat, to nurse wounds, and to try, for a few hours, to forget the arithmetic that surrounds them. Somewhere in the distance, the first stars appear, silent witnesses to the day's tally. You wonder if, in some far future, people will remember these numbers, or if, like so much else, they will simply fade into the background of all the other victories, all the other battles, all the other lists of the dead. You close your eyes and try to imagine a world without counting, a world where the only numbers are the steps between here and home. It is a comforting thought, but you know, as all survivors do, that even the smallest sum will haunt you for the rest of your days. It turns out that even when a great battle is over, there is still one task that nobody wants: delivering the news. You would think, after all the running, shouting, and dying, that the last thing any sensible person would volunteer for is a long, lonely sprint back to Athens. Yet necessity has its own cruel logic. Someone must inform the city. Someone must tell the people that their world has not ended, that the Persians are gone, that the living have prevailed, and not incidentally tally the cost. The Strategoi gather the surviving messengers, men chosen not for their eloquence or courage, but for their legs, and ideally, their ability to avoid dying in transit. There is no ceremony, no special blessing, just a nod, a wave, and a handful of hurried instructions. Run. Tell them what happened. Tell them quickly. A few couriers mutter prayers, tie up their sandals, and set out, glancing back only once at the still smoldering battlefield. You watch as they disappear over the first ridge, vanishing into the same landscape you crossed only days before. It occurs to you that even in the shadow of legend, history is full of practical details: who has the strongest legs, who remembers the way, who is least likely to collapse halfway home. The poets will later turn one courier into a myth. The famous man who runs without stopping, collapses at the city gates, gasps out the news, and dies on the spot. You wonder what his real name was, and whether he minded being reduced to a single, breathless anecdote. For those who remain at Marathon, the departure of the messengers brings its own anxiety. Now, all that is left is to wait. There is talk of what the people of Athens will do when they hear the news. Will they celebrate or tremble in fear that the Persians might simply land elsewhere? There is even more talk about what the couriers will actually say. Will they mention the casualties? Will they remember to praise the Plataeans? Or will Athens, as always, take the credit? You imagine the road ahead for the runners: miles of rough terrain, the constant ache in the legs, the weight of expectation chasing every step. You try to picture the moment when they reach the city, crowds gathering, breathless, half expecting disaster, half dreading hope. Perhaps the first words will be misunderstood. Perhaps nobody will believe that the Persians were truly beaten. In your mind, you see the exhausted courier, bent double, surrounded by skeptical elders and anxious mothers, trying to form a sentence that can carry the burden of what has happened. Meanwhile, back at Marathon, the mood is oddly tense. You would think that after victory, after the counting and the burying, there would be rest. Instead, there is a sense of unfinished business. The city is far away. The enemy might not be done. What if the Persians are only regrouping, preparing to sail around the Cape and attack Athens directly? What if the gods, so frequently invoked and so rarely specific, decide that one victory is enough for today? The runners are not alone in their fear. Everyone is waiting, waiting for news from the city, waiting for confirmation that this day will not end with a new disaster. Some men pace, checking their gear and muttering about whether to march or rest. Others stare into the distance, imagining the runners struggling over rocky hills and through thickets, driven by the knowledge that the fate of Athens, perhaps of all Greece, hangs on their ability to keep moving. In time, word does come, first from the exhausted men themselves, stumbling into the city, then from others relaying the message from one village to the next. The story spreads faster than any runner. The Persians are defeated. There is relief and confusion and the beginnings of celebration. But always in the background is the suspicion that the news is too good to be true. In Athens, the story is already changing. Some say the runner delivered his news with a flourish and a smile. Others say he collapsed, gasping, "We have won," and died in the dust. Still others claim he gave a detailed report, including casualty lists and troop movements, before expiring with perfect dignity. The truth is probably less poetic. A tired, half starved man, barely able to stand, muttering words that nobody quite hears, while the city erupts in chaos behind him. Meanwhile, you think about what it must feel like to run those 40 kilometers, to carry the weight of so many lives, to know that your only reward is exhaustion and a fleeting mention in someone else's story. It is a peculiar kind of immortality, being remembered not for what you were, but for what you carried. Back at Marathon, you hear men talking about the runners with something like envy. They will be remembered, someone says. They will be the heroes. Another snorts. Let them have the glory. I would rather have my feet. You smile tiredly at the truth of it. As dusk falls, the survivors gather for a final head count. There are fewer voices now, less laughter, more silence. The messengers are gone, the city waits, and the gods, if they are still listening, have nothing left to say. You lie down, feeling the aches in every muscle, and wonder if you will ever see Athens again, or if your own story will be told only by those who outlived you. Somewhere, a runner is still moving through the night, legs numb, heart hammering, chasing the promise of immortality with every desperate step. And you, left behind on the field, realize that for every name history remembers, there are 1,000 more who simply walked home. You would think, after a victory like Marathon, that fear would dissolve, replaced by the golden haze of triumph. But no, fear has a way of lingering, like the aftertaste of bad wine or the ache in a bone that never quite healed. The Persians are gone, yes, but gone in the way a storm moves out to sea, not destroyed, only somewhere out of sight, brooding, maybe planning their return. Nobody is quite willing to trust the horizon. You see the fleet first through the haze, hundreds of ships bobbing in the shallow bay, their black hulls oddly cheerful in the evening light. Some Persians still scramble to board, pushing and shouting, desperate for passage on overcrowded decks. Others stand on the shore, their banners drooping, waiting for the last orders to retreat, or defend, or simply to vanish. The Greeks, meanwhile, are frozen in a strange mixture of relief and dread. Yes, the battle on land is won, but the sea is another matter. The Strategoi hold hasty conferences, voices pitched low but tense. What if the fleet sails south, rounds Cape Sunion, and lands directly at Athens? The city is exposed. Most of its defenders are here, their feet still muddy from battle, their nerves frayed raw. Orders are barked, men are told to ready themselves, to march back to Athens at once. There is no time for celebration, no time for grieving. The battered survivors of Marathon must become, once again, the defenders of their city. It is a cruel joke, this endless cycle. You have barely finished one ordeal before another waits in the wings. The older soldiers grumble as they prepare to move, stripping what little gear can be salvaged from the field. Victory is just another word for new problems, one mutters, tightening the strap on his helmet. The younger men, still running on adrenaline, try to act brave. Let them come, they say, even as their hands shake and their eyes dart toward the horizon, searching for the first sign of Persian sails turning south. Meanwhile, the Persian fleet stirs. Sails are raised, oars dip and flash, and one by one, the ships begin to glide out into deeper water. For a while, it is unclear whether they are leaving for good or simply repositioning for another strike. Rumors fly faster than the fleet itself. Some claim to see the great royal barge. Others swear that a second army waits just out of sight, ready to pounce. You find yourself wishing you had paid more attention to naval matters. Land warfare is terrifying, but at least you can see your enemy, feel the weight of your shield, do something with your hands. The sea is a different beast. You are at the mercy of winds, of luck, of gods who never learned to swim. The Persians, for all their losses, still have ships, and ships mean they can return whenever they please. The march back to Athens begins in fits and starts. Men limp along the dusty roads, blisters blooming anew, spears propped on weary shoulders. There are no songs, only the rhythmic slap of sandals and the occasional muttered complaint about the state of the world. You feel a kind of resentment, as if the Persians are cheating by refusing to simply accept their defeat and go home. As the miles pass, your thoughts become tangled. What will Athens look like when you return? Will the city gates be open or barred in terror? Will the citizens greet you as saviors or blame you for dragging the fight to their doorstep? No one knows, no one even pretends to know. The Strategoi send scouts ahead, hoping for news, any news, of the fleet's direction. Some return with wild tales. The Persians are headed north, south, east, west, anywhere but here. Others bring only silence. The uncertainty is worse than defeat. At least with defeat, you know what you are facing. With uncertainty, every shadow is an enemy, every gust of wind the herald of 1,000 Persian sails. You notice as the night deepens that even the bravest among you are praying more frequently. Athena is invoked, and Poseidon too, though in a more cautious tone. Someone claims to have seen a shooting star, an omen, surely, though nobody can agree what it means. You suspect the gods are enjoying the confusion. Finally, as dawn approaches, word filters through. The Persian fleet has truly departed, vanishing into the horizon, their masts mere splinters against the lightning sky. A cheer ripples through the ranks, weak, uncertain, but genuine. The nightmare, it seems, is over, but the fear does not disappear. It merely sinks into your bones, settling in for a long stay. The memory of the fleet, the threat of return, the knowledge that all victories are temporary, these are the real spoils of war. When you reach the outskirts of Athens, exhausted and weary, you find the city waiting, anxious, hopeful, changed. There is joy, yes, but also relief, and a weary understanding that nothing is ever truly safe. You are home, or something like it, but home is not what it was. The Persian fleet is gone for now, but the fear remains, a quiet companion on every street and in every silent prayer. You realize that for the Greeks, as for the Persians, the sea is never truly empty, and history is just the long wait for the next shadow on the horizon. If you thought the battlefield was chaotic, you were clearly unprepared for Athens in the wake of rumor. By the time the battered survivors and the first messengers stagger into the city, news has already arrived. News and its faithful companion, confusion. The air is thick, not just with expectation, but with something more pungent. The smell of thousands of anxious Athenians squeezed into every open space, whispering, shouting, and generally making a nuisance of themselves. You find yourself at the edge of the city, caught in the human tide. Everyone wants to know what happened at Marathon, and no one is willing to wait for the full story. Old men clutch their walking sticks and argue in the marketplace about whether the Persians were defeated by cunning, by courage, or by sheer good fortune. Some claim it was the will of Athena, others that it was simply a matter of better footwear. It is unclear who is right, and, as usual, nobody is listening anyway. The younger citizens are more energetic, darting through the crowds, repeating whatever rumor they last heard as if it were gospel truth. The Persians are coming, shouts one. The Persians are dead, insists another. Somewhere, a woman weeps. No one knows if it is for relief or despair. You step aside as a pair of elderly women march past, laden with baskets of bread and oil, muttering darkly, that the price of grain will double by the end of the week. The agora is packed. Here, politicians climb onto crates to deliver impromptu speeches promising swift action or immediate celebration, depending on which way the wind is blowing. Their words drift over the heads of the crowd, quickly lost in the noise of 1,000 other conversations. Every corner boasts its own expert, each more confident and less informed than the last. You hear wild tales. The Persian king himself was captured and forced to swear never to return. An Athenian hero killed 50 men with a single stone. The gods descended and fought side by side with the hoplites. By noon, the stories have become so grand that even the original messengers seem uncertain what really happened. There is, of course, the practical matter of supplies. Bread sellers do brisk business, raising their prices with each new wave of panic. Housewives jostle for position at the wells, determined to fill every jar before the city is besieged, or perhaps before the next rumor hits. The scent of fear is mingled with that of sweat, oil, stale bread, and hope turned sour by repetition. You see a group of mothers clutching their children, eyes darting from every stranger, desperate for news of husbands, brothers, sons. Each fresh arrival from the road is surrounded, bombarded with questions. Did you see Lysander? Is Nicias alive? Have the Persians burned the farms? Most have no answers. Some invent them anyway. A few optimists begin hanging garlands over doorways, muttering prayers of thanks to the gods for deliverance. Others are less trusting. This is only the beginning, warns one gray-bearded merchant. The Persians will be back. Mark my words. His audience nods, half believing, half hoping to be proven wrong. At the temples, the priests do a brisk trade in offerings. Lines form at the altars of Athena and Zeus. Coins clink, incense smoke drifts, and nervous supplicants ask for protection or forgiveness, or, in one overheard case, a good harvest to make up for all the lost sleep. Throughout it all, the city vibrates with anxiety. Every sound, a dog barking, a child crying, a door slamming, sends ripples through the crowd. In the narrow streets, tempers fray. Two men nearly come to blows over whose neighbor brought back the more reliable gossip. Somewhere, a donkey breaks free and causes a minor stampede, as if even the animals are caught up in the general unrest. When the battered victors finally limp into view, Athens erupts. There are cheers, tears, more questions, and no real answers. The soldiers are too tired to explain, the messengers too hoarse to repeat themselves. A few clever citizens immediately claim to have always believed in victory, though you remember them expressing the opposite opinion just yesterday. The city elders finally call an assembly, and the people crowd into the pnyx to hear the official story. The speeches are full of the usual flourishes, praise for the gods, for the generals, for the courage of every Athenian. The truth, as always, is squeezed and stretched to fit the mood of the crowd. The Plataeans are mentioned briefly before the narrative returns to Athenian valor and sacrifice. As night falls, the city begins to settle, but only slightly. The market's empty, the wells are quieter, the priests close their doors. Still, the air is restless. Fear lingers. Every family counts its own losses and blessings. No one quite believes that the Persians are truly gone, and everyone wonders what tomorrow will bring. You lie awake, squeezed into a borrowed corner, listening to the murmurs of a sleepless city. The scent of smoke, bread, sweat, and worry hangs heavy. In the darkness, you realize that the battle may have ended at Marathon, but in Athens, the real fight against fear, rumor, and the endless anxieties of ordinary life has only just begun. You would expect, after such a victory, that Athens would know how to celebrate. You would expect parades, feasts, poems, and parties that last until the stars begin to blur. But as the days pass and the news settles into every alley and household, you begin to realize that nobody in Athens is quite satisfied, least of all the victors. At first, of course, there are the formalities. The generals are summoned, the surviving soldiers paraded before the city. Speeches are delivered at the Pnyx, filled with references to the gods' favor, the wisdom of Athens, the valor of every citizen, and a perfunctory nod to the Plataeans, whose contribution is already shrinking in the official retellings. The crowds cheer, the priests wave incense, the bards pluck at lyres, and compose rhyming couplets about how the city stood alone and unafraid. But underneath the official celebration is a sense of weariness, a fatigue so deep it seems to seep into the city's stones. The victors, paraded through the streets, look less like heroes and more like men who have survived a particularly unpleasant chore. Their wounds ache, their minds are elsewhere. You catch snatches of their conversations, complaints about the quality of rations, arguments over who is owed what, and, inevitably, speculation about when the Persians will return. No one is in any hurry to volunteer for another round. The politicians, never slow to seize an opportunity, begin to debate the next steps. Some call for new defenses to be built, others for sacrifices to be offered on a scale never before attempted. There is talk of new alliances, of punishing those who did not do enough, of rewarding those who stood bravely in the hour of need. Each man seems more concerned with his own place in the story than with the truth of what happened. Meanwhile, the ordinary citizens get back to the business of living, which is, as always, complicated. The markets reopen, but the price of everything has doubled: grain, oil, shoes, even gossip. The widows and mothers of the fallen try to navigate the tangle of compensation promised by the city, filling out forms, standing in lines, and cursing the officials who can never find the right tablet or remember a single name. The surviving soldiers nurse their wounds, avoid talking about what they saw, and hope the gods will leave them in peace. You notice that victory does not erase old arguments, it only gives them new ammunition. Who fought hardest? Who ran the fastest? Who made the boldest decision? In every tavern, men retell the story of the battle, each one a little different, each one placing himself a little closer to the center. The Plataeans, once so warmly welcomed, find themselves gently nudged aside as the Athenians begin to remember Marathon as an almost exclusively Athenian triumph. You see more than one Plataean muttering into his wine, regretting the day he volunteered. The city's mood wobbles between pride and anxiety. There are new fears. What if the Persians come again and next time bring twice as many? What if Sparta decides that Athens, now flush with victory, needs to be reminded of her place? What if the gods are simply bored and Marathon was just the first act in a much longer play? Even the victors themselves cannot seem to enjoy their fame. The generals receive honors, but each is quietly watching his rivals, wondering who will be blamed for the dead, for the wounds, for the fields left untended during the campaign. The soldiers receive their share of thanks, but also their share of suspicion. Did they loot too enthusiastically? Did they spare the right prisoners? Are their wounds truly as bad as they say? Herodotus, never far from the action, wanders through the aftermath, notebook in hand, recording every boast, every complaint, every rumor of new threats on the horizon. He notes, with his usual dry humor, that no city is as dissatisfied with victory as Athens. Perhaps he is right. In the countryside, farmers return to their fields to find crops trampled, fences broken, animals missing. They count their losses, mutter about compensation, and quietly hope that the next Persian army chooses a different route. The merchants, for their part, take advantage of the uncertainty, raising prices and spreading rumors as a kind of insurance against whatever comes next. As the days pass, you realize that the battle itself is fading into the background. It becomes, like all victories, just another story, told and retold, polished and exaggerated, but never quite enough to fill the silence that comes after. The city grows restless. Some call for a new festival, others for a new army. A few simply want to sleep without dreams. You walk the streets, listening to the murmur of dissatisfaction. It is everywhere, in the market, in the temples, in the awkward silence between old friends who fought together and now do not quite know what to say. The only true comfort is in the routines of daily life, in the return of ordinary chores and familiar complaints. In the end, you understand that no victory is ever complete. There are always debts to pay, stories to rewrite, wounds to nurse. The city may sing of glory, but its people are left with the uncomfortable knowledge that nothing is finished and that for all the speeches and statues, everyone is still waiting for the next battle, the next disaster, the next opportunity to be unsatisfied. And so, Athens settles into its uneasy peace, haunted by its own success, its people left with the quiet, persistent realization that even the greatest victories are in the end only the beginning of the next set of problems. In the weeks and months that follow, life in Athens settles, if that is the word, into a new pattern, and the story of Marathon slips almost imperceptibly from memory into legend. The city resumes its routines. Merchants return to haggling, bakers to baking, philosophers to questioning everything except the price of olives. But beneath the return to normalcy, something has changed, though nobody quite agrees on what it is. Victory is supposed to feel definitive, you think. Yet the reality is stranger, more ambiguous, and infinitely more tiresome. The marathon dead are honored with speeches and fresh cut laurel wreaths, their names hammered into marble and recited by children in the agora. The living, at least the ones who can stand it, march in procession, heads held high and eyes scanning the crowd for signs of envy or indifference. The Plataeans are thanked with a nod and a half hearted feast, after which their names fade into the margin notes of history, precisely as everyone expected. If you wander through Athens these days, you hear the same story retold a dozen ways, by generals looking for votes, by poets in search of a patron, by weary soldiers angling for one more free cup of wine. Sometimes the tale grows grander with each telling, sometimes it shrinks, worn down by repetition, until all that remains is a single improbable detail: a runner who drops dead with the good news, a miraculous omen at dawn, a Persian king who swore vengeance and then, confusingly, disappeared into myth. The school teachers memorize the list of fallen, their students dutifully reciting the names while thinking mostly about the next meal. The old men in the shade by the temple walls shake their heads and insist that things were different in their day. The politicians find new ways to attach themselves to the victory, making speeches that, when you listen closely, all sound suspiciously similar. Only the widows and the mothers of the dead keep the truth alive, that every name carved on stone was once a person with debts and dreams and opinions about how long a spear ought to be. Herodotus, yes, he is still here, records everything with the same mixture of curiosity and resignation. His notebooks bulge with numbers, stories, and contradictions. He asks everyone he meets for their version of events and receives a fresh set of exaggerations in return. He is less a historian now than a kind of collective memory, gathering every boredom and every boast and laying them side by side for future generations to misread. You hear now and then that the world is watching Athens. Other cities send envoys, some to congratulate, others to warn. Sparta remains silent, neither pleased nor angered, which makes the Athenians more nervous than if the Spartans had marched in shouting. There are rumors that the Persians are gathering once again, that they are building more ships, plotting new invasions, waiting for the moment when Athens grows careless or complacent. The citizens whisper, wonder, worry, but in the end return to their everyday complaints: taxes, festivals, the weather, and the mysterious tendency of all heroes to forget their debts. You attend a festival held to mark the victory, one of many, for there is always a need for another festival in Athens. The priests recite prayers, the poets sing, the city pretends for a few hours that all is well. Wine flows, bread is torn and passed, and as the crowd grows drunk, a group of boys reenact the great charge, stumbling and laughing, wooden swords clashing in mock seriousness. They know the story, but not the fear. They remember the numbers, but not the nights without sleep. You smile, not because it is funny, but because it is how history works. The facts fade, the feelings remain. Sometimes you wonder if the gods care about any of this. Do they enjoy the festivals, or are they bored by the same offerings, the same promises, the same prayers for victory and peace? Perhaps you think the gods invented history as a kind of entertainment, a way to pass the endless time between storms. Or maybe they have already forgotten Marathon, moving on to newer, more exciting disasters. Athens itself, for all its pride, seems restless. The city is full of new plans, temples to build, walls to raise, ships to commission. The marathon victory is praised, but also quietly set aside. There is always another threat, another vote, another rumor. In the end, it is not the victory that defines Athens, but the never ending movement from one crisis to the next. You realize, with a sense of tired amusement, that this is the true legacy of Marathon. The knowledge that history, like the city itself, never truly sleeps. On a quiet evening, you stand on the Pnyx and look out over Athens. The sun sets, turning the city gold, and the stories of the day blend into the murmur of the night. Somewhere a bard is already composing a new epic. Somewhere a boy dreams of future battles. You feel the weight of it all, the glory, the grief, the endless repetition, and strangely, you are comforted. For in the end, the marathon you lived through is not the one the world will remember. That version will be neater, braver, more beautiful. Your own memory, dull and heavy, will fade. But maybe that is for the best. Let history repeat. Let poets embellish. Let politicians claim what they like. You have survived. You have seen how even the greatest glory is stitched together from boredom, pain, and the quiet hope that next time things will be different. And as you finally drift towards sleep, your mind circling the details, the jokes, the unremarkable acts of courage and pettiness, you realize that this, after all, is how history truly works. Endlessly retold, rarely believed, and always just a little bit too long